We're here with Dr. Malveaux here at the MLK Luncheon, and we're here, first of all, to welcome you to the Silicon Valley. Welcome and good morning, Dr. Malveaux.
Well, good morning. Thanks for the warm welcome. It's good to be here.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So we know you're going to be emceeing, and we want to know, basically, have you been out here before, and what have your dealings been as you've been out here?
Well, I'm a native San Franciscan, so I was just in the Bay Area for Christmas to see my 88-year-old mom.
Wonderful.
So, and I get back, 4 or 5 times a year. I don't get down this way very often, so I was commenting yesterday that I don't think I've actually flown to San Jose in probably 15 years. So that's a different airport,
Definitely.
a very different airport. So I'm looking forward to the free internet and everything on my way back out. But obviously, keeping track with the trends here in the Silicon Valley and with what's going on in terms of technology and the absorption or not absorption of our people here in the Silicon Valley. I chair Reverend Jackson's Push Excel board, which is our education arm, and we're the ones who give the scholarships. So, of course, we've been very proud of the work Reverend has done to ensure that more African Americans are included in some of these corporate boards. But also, there's a gaping need for more African Americans to be included as employees. And I think that this is an opportunity, if some of the people from industry are here, to begin that conversation. But I think even more than that, the Community Action Society, who I know is doing really great work, can continue a conversation about scholarships, about training, about pipelines with our high schools, and even with young folks as young as our Braylon here.
Excellent. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, that also goes into Braylon, what we're doing right now.
Would you like to be on the air, Braylon? I think you would. Come on. Smile, Braylon. Say hi.
Say hello.
Okay, Braylon wants to be a diva today.
He's definitely going to take over this interview, most definitely. Okay. But yeah, most definitely, I see you're doing a lot right now, especially working with Reverend Jackson. Are there any other endeavors that you're doing, especially in the areas of education?
Well, I've started an organization called Economic Education, and we're putting together some products to basically help us, African American people, but other folks understand the economy more. And other than that, I do have a book that's coming out in a week or so. It's called Are We Better Off? Race, Obama, and Public Policy. And it's a column collection. So it's looking at some of the columns I've written about the president over the past 7 years, but it also raises a lot of questions. So it's not just old stuff. There's a long essay, a substantive essay, that really talks about how we begin to frame this time period from a historical perspective and what it really means for the next president of the United States.
Right.
There are a number of questions we didn't ask President Obama,
right,
because we were happy to have a black man in public office.
I agree.
Now, if I were Ted Cruz, which, praise the Lord, I'm not. But if I were Ted Cruz and some African-American folks came and said, why is there no more money for HBCUs? Ted Cruz might say, why didn't you ask President Obama that? Because we lost money for HBCUs under President Obama. So, while we all were very excited, and so I remain excited. Correct. I mean, quite frankly, at State of the Union, I told someone, I said I would have reached back and given Joe Biden a high five, reached back and taken, Paul Ryan, to another planet, because he was sitting there rude, rolling his eyes and doing all that good stuff. But in any case, still proud of him, but at the same time, still essentially wanting results. And that's what my book asks. So that's, as I said, among the things I'm doing. I try to keep it busy and keep it real.
Well, that's great. That's excellent. I'm glad that you're near and dear to HBCUs, especially I'm an alum and I'm also an educator. So I'm glad
You're an alum from?
Alcorn State University.
Alcorn. I've been there. Of course, I think I've been to most of our colleges. I was at Bennett, of course, for 5 years. And,
yes, I do remember that.
And as I tell people, once an HBCU president, always an HBCU president. You've then been indoctrinated. And whenever people say, where are they going to school? I'm like, I'm sure you're thinking about, one of our HBCUs.
Right,
yeah.
and as you asked my student, my young lady, they have not gotten to that point, but I definitely take them to places like the Black College Expo and other things so they can be exposed, because that's the difference. Out here on the West Coast, we are not exposed to our schools, and so you need an educator or someone who is an alum to usually expose our kids who are in our school systems.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Dr. Malveaux, thank you.
Well, thank you.
It's been awesome.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I can do better than that. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Emmett Carson, and I'm the CEO of Silicon Valley Community Foundation. It is our pleasure to be one of the sponsors for this event, and it is my extreme honor to be able to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Julianne Malveaux. I also want to thank the earlier awardees, and a special thanks tribute to Mrs. Williams for all that you have done for this community. We all stand on your shoulders. Thank you so much. So this is the second time that I've had the pleasure to introduce my good friend Julianne. This time I hope to get it right. I keep having to practice. So I have to get it right. She said, why you say that, Emmett? Because I need to do justice to our own queen. And you are our queen in many ways for the African American community. You are a Renaissance woman. And I just don't say that as hyperbole. She really is a Renaissance woman. Dr. Cornel West said of Julianne, she is the most iconoclastic public intellectual in the country. Her research on issues of race, of poverty, of education has shaped the discussions in the 21st century around African Americans. She has published articles in the USA Today, Black Issues in Higher Education, Ms. Magazine, Essence Magazine, and The Progressive. For over a decade, she had weekly newspaper columns in the Los Angeles Times, the Charlotte Observer, the New Orleans Tribune, the Detroit Free Press, and the San Francisco Examiner. Dr. Malveaux has been a frequent commentator on CNN, BET, PBS, NBC, ABC, Fox News, MSNBC, CNBC, and C-SPAN, just to name a few. Now, if that wasn't enough, because it would be for most people, but not for a Renaissance woman, she also served ably and with distinction as the college president of Bennett College for Women. During that time, she was the architect of exciting and innovative transformation at America's oldest historically black college for women. And when she departed, the school was enjoying a historic enrollment high. She received her PhD in economics from MIT. Now let me tell you, that's a bad system. I can tell you, I got mine from Princeton. So to be a sister in 1980, to get your PhD from MIT, can't touch that. She's been on the faculty or visiting faculty of the New School for Social Research, San Francisco State University, the University of California, College of Notre Dame, Michigan State University, and Howard University. She holds several honorary degrees and received her bachelor's and master's degrees in economics from Boston College. She is currently the honorary co-chair of the Social Action Commission of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and serves on the boards of the Economic Policy Institute, as well as the Recreation Wish List Committee of Washington. A native of San Francisco, she is the president and owner of Economic Education, a 501c3 nonprofit headquartered in Washington, D.C. As I bring my sister up, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, know that her Twitter handle is Dr. J last word. You are about to get the last word. Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you, Emmett. I think I ought to take him with me on the road. What do y'all think?
Thank you so much, Emmett, and we are proud of you and the work you're doing here in the Silicon Valley. Y'all are blessed to have this brother administering that community foundation. He's a seasoned foundation professional. I know the community will be better because of the work that he's done. So thank you again, and thank you, Jackie and Mrs. Copeland, my folks from here. And I want to also, just before I get to talking, acknowledge I've got some Bennett students in the house, or not students, former students. So my former students, Delrisha, Khadijah, hands in the air. These are lovely young women. And if you have not thought about sending your daughter to Bennett College, please think about it. And if you have not thought about sending your young person to a historically black college, please think about it. We don't believe in, let me just put it this way, the blacker the college, the sweeter the knowledge. Drop it like that. Also, my family, Arlona McGriff and Miles, is the boy 6 or is he 7? He's 7. This is my godchild, Miles. Miles, you did it before, put your hand in the air. Put your hand in the air for the nice lady. Okay, is he precious? I always gotta acknowledge my folks. So I really want to thank Milan for the opportunity to be here for any number of reasons, but I'll tell you one. I had an opportunity to do a different kind of meditation about Dr. King because the program was titled Remembering the Queen. So I'm really grateful for that, Milan. I'm also grateful to have been assigned Ms. Brittany, who's done a really great job of assisting me while I'm here. She's one of the student ambassadors, and I know she's around. Thank you, Brittany, for taking care of me. And I want to thank all of you for being here. I am especially honored, I have to tell you, to be here on a day when Mrs. Williams is being honored. Just give her another round of applause. What a gracious, phenomenal, wonderful woman. And you know, as I listen to her, it's really very fitting that she's being honored at the same time that you're remembering Mrs. King for so many reasons. When she talked about her own background and the humility and the folks who washed clothes, I first did a flashback. My great-grandmother was a maid. Actually, in 1940, 70% of all black women were maids. So it was not unusual. Even many who had college degrees worked in the summers doing whole housework, homework, because that's the only thing that they could do. But I keep a picture of my great-grandmother in my office. And I keep it there above my desk because although I tend to think of myself as a pretty grounded person, every now and then I have a bout of the divas. And when I have the bout of that, I just worked so hard. And then I look at the picture of my great-grandmother and say, she scrubbed floors, so I don't have to. Don't you dare think that giving a speech or writing an article is hard work. Don't you even dare think about it. And Mrs. Williams, my folks are from Mississippi too. A little town called Moss Point, Mississippi. We call it jump back. Because if you jump back, you're out of town. But in any case, we all have those roots, and so did Coretta. She picked cotton. People don't think about Coretta Scott King having to bend over and pick cotton. But she did, and with grace and dignity, and it didn't hurt her. And while we don't want to do that generational thing that I sometimes do, of telling the young folks, you don't know, I don't want to sound like the folks who say Abraham Lincoln walked to school with a lantern. I do think, some folks will tell you that, or, if you don't eat your food, the poor children in China starve. All the stuff your folks told you to try to, get you out of yourself. But what I would say to young people is that it does make sense to study these elders who did things that we think we might not do. It's good sense, makes sense to study Coretta Scott King and that phenomenal life. So again, I had a time on Saturday fooling around, thinking about Mrs. King, and I'm going to apologize to her soror if I say some of the things she already said, which I may or may not, but I want to thank her as well for putting some of that out there. The reason why it was such a treat for me is because I had the honor and privilege of having been able to spend some time with Mrs. King. I belong to a group called the Skinner, the Black Leadership Family. And the group was a group of African-American leaders, and I think when I joined, I was a wannabe leader. The leaders of an intergenerational group of folks at the time ranged in age from about 80 down to about 30. Dr. Maya was part of the group. Several members of Congress were part of the group. We met twice a year. Thank you, sweetie. We met twice a year in various parts of the country and sometimes on the islands. Y'all wouldn't know that Dr. Dorothy Height loved to gamble, would you? She didn't gamble much, but she would put some quarters in the slot machine if she had the opportunity. Coretta Scott King, Betty Shabazz, and Dr. Maya liked to play word games and cards together. These are the feet that I sat at, the shoulders that I stand on. And so I hadn't really thought about Mrs. King for a long time like that, to just concentrate on her. And so, as I said, this was just an absolute and utter treat to think about this woman and all she did. Now, Malama, I have to tell you one thing, though. She was not behind the throne. She was beside the king. This was not the power behind, this was the pillar beside. Her strength was the strength that allowed her husband to do what he had to do. When you read her book, My Life with Martin, when you read her sister's book, The Desert Rose, when you get contemporaneous accounts from people about her life, what they love to tell you is that while she certainly loved and honored her husband, she was a feminist. She was a feminist, and she talked about the ways that women were treated in the civil rights movement. She said in 1966, not enough attention has been focused on the roles played by women in the struggle. By and large, men have formed leadership in the civil rights struggle, but women have been the backbone of the whole civil rights movement. This came from Mrs. King. She fought to make sure that women had opportunities, and she gave Dr. King deserved pushback. Often when he intended to attend something that she wanted to attend, she said to him, just a minute, I'd like to go. Sometimes she got away, sometimes she didn't. They had 4 kids, so they had to balance that. But at the same time, she did not mind standing up and speaking up for herself. This is important because all too often we sisters allow ourselves to be sidelined. We want to say that let the brother take the lead. Well, we can take the lead together. I recall the Million Man March in 1995. I got in a lot of trouble. Several folks of you have been kind enough to say I've been following you for a long time. If you have, you've seen a lot of interesting things occur. Because unfortunately, I still haven't learned how to bite my tongue. But in any case, when the Million Man March occurred, Minister Louis Farrakhan, who has since become a friend, said that the men can march and lead so the women can stay home and teach and pray. That did not sit well with me. I said, how can you lead an army when you have half of the people sit home? 10 years later, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and I got to be good friends, and I was the co-MC of the 2005 Millions for movement. We were able to ask and insist, indeed, that women were part of the speakers list, and about 1/3 of the speakers were women. We were able to get the sisters of the nation more fully involved. That's the kind of thing that Mrs. King felt very strongly about, that women have to be there. Now, she certainly did not oppose the Million Man March with the vehemence that I did, and I was in trouble with everybody, from Dr. Height to Mayor Barry to, I went somewhere people didn't even give me food. I was like, wait a minute, y'all, this is not going to turn out right. But being unbought and unbussed, I went to the kitchen and got my own. But in any case, what we do know is that this is a sister who cared about us, who gave women the opportunity to push back, and who pushed back herself. And yet, when the chips were down, what Martin King said about her is that he knew that she was his backbone. And she herself said that there was struggle, but when he was attacked, she was the one to reassure him. And when you look at anything, people could not use anything against them. But the FBI take Dr. King in embarrassing positions and then called Coretta and played the tapes for her. Imagine that. Called the way, but when the news asked her what she thought, she said, oh, there were some horrible tapes. I could hardly hear what was on them. She would not give them the satisfaction of knowing that this was a point of pain. At the same time, what we must know about her effectiveness is that even after Dr. King had been assassinated, the FBI continued to spy on her. And in one of the files wrote that despite her, I'm going to paraphrase it because I'm not going to look for the page, but they said despite her demure appearance, that she was really a troublemaker. Now, why did they call her a troublemaker? Because in addition to the work that Dr. King did that she was fully invested in addition, as my sister from AKA has said, to her founding of the King Center, in addition to her spending 15 years to get that holiday for us, despite, and let's be clear, despite the fact that right now, nobody would imagine that having a King holiday would be controversial. In 1969 to 1986, it was. Jesse Helms called Dr. King a communist and worse, but there's Jesse Helms. Others who call themselves liberals said that they didn't want a King holiday because it would be too expensive. How could we afford another federal holiday? Well, you know, people hide behind dollars when they don't make any sense. And so what we found, but Coretta prevailed. She kept it up, kept it up, kept it up. But in addition to all that, you know what she did. She was a peace activist really almost before Dr. King was. She was involved as a delegate with the Women's Strike for Peace, the United Nations, and in Switzerland in 1963. In addition to all of the things that Dr. King stood for, Coretta Scott King came out on GBLT issues early and often, and was very disturbed that the African American community did not embrace the civil rights of the GBLT community. She talked about this at length and as often as she could, and I'm going to look for that particular quote. She said, the homophobia is like racism and anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry, in that it seeks to dehumanize a large group of people, to deny their humanity, their dignity, and their personhood. This sets the stage for further repression and violence that spreads all too easily to victimize the next minority group. She said, homophobic attitudes and policies are unjust and unworthy of a free society and must be opposed by all Americans who believe in democracy. In another quote, she talked about a need for the African American community to be educated about homophobia, to be educated about homophobia. And that's a need we still have. What else did she do besides simply, and it's not simply, but she had her own life and her own issues, apartheid. The anti-apartheid movement was something that she embraced fully. She embraced fully, traveled, supported, met with Winnie Mandela and others. This was a Coretta Scott King that we must remember. Because when we remember that sister, we remember her as a strong woman who helped a strong man, a strong couple who transformed Black America. With George Bush, who I very rarely quote, when George Bush spoke at Mrs. King's funeral, she said, in loving a leader, she became one. And indeed, if you look at the possible trajectories of her life, she wanted to be a classical musician. And indeed, she used her gift for music all over the world, with many programs that included her gift of song. But she made a choice, and she said, as her husband died, I have embraced everything that my husband stood for. As my sister said, 4 days after her husband was assassinated, who could imagine? 4 days after that assassination, she's speaking. She's not crying, she's not wailing, she's not moaning, she is speaking because she believed that the struggle was so important. This is so important for us because what she is telling us and what we're remembering when we remember Mrs. King is we're remembering tenacity. We're remembering not to ever give up. We're remembering the many, many things that she put out there in terms of peace. Who thinks about peace now? A young sister told me the other day that she went to an event, party. She bumped into somebody, and the brother was about to fire on her. Now, she's a cute little girl. I wouldn't be surprised if the brother tried to hit on her. But no, he was angry because she bumped up into him. There's a level of anger in our community. A 9-year-old boy shot, lured out into an alley because his daddy didn't have it all together. Somebody was mad at his daddy, so they shoot a 9-year-old. Now, I'm going to talk about the police in a minute. But for just a minute, let's talk about peace and us. Let's talk about, I'm not going to be heroic. I'm not going to say, what about black on black crime? Because there's no such thing. No one talks about white on white crime. So it's not about black on black crime. It's about killing young people before they had an opportunity to even live. It's about essentially snuffing out potential and possibility. Now, I am of a certain age, so I've had the privilege and honor of speaking at King events probably for the past 30 or so years, and listening to others speak of them too. And people always want to ask you, what would Dr. King say? Well, see, he ain't here, so you can't ask. And the same thing is true of Mrs. King. What would Coretta say? I don't know. But here is what I do know. I know that she was passionate about peace. And I know if we had that same kind of peaceful passion in our communities now, we would not have the murders that we have. To have that same kind of peaceful passion. Hope that the young little heroes here, y'all little heroes, young heroes, little heroes, y'all not that little. But these young men doing their thing, where are the other young men and women? And where are we, y'all? Where are we to say, this is how we do it? We don't have to do it with violence. We don't have to do it with anger. We don't need to have a community that is up in arms. What we need is to understand the continuing nature of struggle. See, because what essentially we are dealing with is a situation where some of us think we got it made. Y'all have if you think you haven't made what? You have not been watching TV. And you don't, but a lot of people, I'm not picking on anybody, I could pick on me too. Many of us are comfortable. We're middle class. We haven't missed a meal. We might have missed a paycheck or two here or there, but somebody in our family has something on the table. Nobody's walking around in this room with holes in their shoes. Y'all have fresh pantyhose on. You know you're town and out when you don't have fresh pantyhose. Many have been to school. Some of our students, of course, are struggling to put the money together for their tuition. But you have access, you have opportunity. So many folks think, it's okay. It's not okay. When you have the kind of unemployment rates that you see, even though the unemployment rate is down, 9% of the black community is not low. That is not a low unemployment rate. If you look at the real one, it's something more like 20%. One of the things that we have to look at is the income inequality that we've been experiencing. Oxfam released a report today. The World Economic Forum is meeting in Davos, Switzerland. And Oxfam calculated that in just last year, 62 people worldwide had the same amount of wealth as the bottom half of the world population. 62 people had the same amount of wealth as 3.6 billion people. 62 people. Now, 5 years ago, it was 388 people to have that bottom. Now it's 62 individuals. Imagine that. The wealth of the richest 62 people rose by 44% since 2015. More than $500 billion. But the wealth of the bottom half fell by 41%. Up and down. The poorest half of the population, the poorest half of the world, is beset by disease and hunger and things that have been sidelined. Jeffrey Sachs said that he thought we could eliminate poverty by 2020. Not. Why not? Because the investment has not been made there. Yet we know what Dr. King and what Coretta Scott King said about poverty. The curse of poverty is an abomination in any age. It is like cannibalism. It is like cannibalism. This is what Dr. King said. And yet we continue to tolerate that income inequality and the nonsense that allows our legislators to do things like give tax breaks to the wealthy, but cut food stamps, to save money. Take Flint, Michigan, off the Detroit water system and put them with filth so that young people have already lifetime, permanent damage done because they have been drinking water that looks like iced tea, or worse. But the governor of Michigan, Mr. Snyder, he knew about this. He's known about it for months. It's taken President Obama to sign an emergency order, and unfortunately the order is only for 90 days. Well, people will get water filters and bottled water. That's not a solution. This man needs to be impeached. But while we at it, why don't we go get some Rahm Emanuel, who thinks it's okay for a police officer to shoot a child in the back 16 times. 16 times, and then hide the video in the middle of the mayoral election. Now the video comes on, oh, I didn't know that video was there, right? And I didn't know there was a lake in Chicago. But we have these folks. And then we had Dr. King and Mrs. Coretta Scott King, who took the mic and kept talking until Dr. King was assassinated and Mrs. King stood up. And when she stood up, we didn't all make it easy for her. I especially think of some of the pushback she got when she dealt with the GBLT issue. And how so many African American people said, you need to get off that issue. Well, that's just like the people who told Dr. King he needed to get off Vietnam. Why are you going to talk about that? That has nothing to do with this, but it's all connected. And where we lose out is that we forget to make the connections and to keep focused on those connections. When we focus on the connections, we understand that all these issues have to do with those triple evils: poverty, racism, and militarism. And those are the three triple threats that Dr. King talked about all the time. The way that these are intertwined: racism, poverty, militarism. Now you have people who don't want to even talk about racism. They say we are in a post-racial era. Well, I got your post and I got your race. When I watch President Obama, and of course, he and I don't see the world the same way, not that he cares what I see. And that's neither here nor there. But my most recent book is called Are We Better Off? Race, Obama, and Public Policy. It'll be floating around, I guess, in a week or so from now. And all y'all will know about it. Go online and buy it. Plug. But in any case, while we do not always see the world the same way, I'm excited about that president. I love the way he carried himself in the State of the Union. Now, I wasn't loving up on everything he said, Emmett. I think you and I might agree that there was a little bit of economic exaggeration there. The State of the Union ain't all that strong economically, especially in our community. But here's what I do know for sure: that if I had been President Obama, at some point I would have spun around and given Joe Biden a high five, and spun around the other side and hit Powell Ryan upside his head. I mean, that poor little man had no home training. How do you sit behind the President of the United States with the camera on you all the time? He was more fidgety than little Miles here. I mean, at one point he picked his nose, he rolled his eyes. And I think he picked his nose with the wrong finger, if you know what I mean. Because I said, is he trying to say something to somebody? But in any case, the level of disrespect was amazing. And it reminds us what we have to fight about. Ryan is the one who keeps talking about cutting budgets. And he doesn't care whether those budget cuts hit education. He doesn't care whether those budget cuts make food. He doesn't care whether the budget cuts hit our elderly. He just wants budgets to be cut. While many have shown that when you cut these budgets, you basically starve the entirety of our society. And so when we look at this, if anybody in this room does not vote, I don't know what's wrong with you. Please don't tell me. Please just that's a piece of information you don't have to share with me. Here's what Coretta said about the struggle word. She said, freedom is never won. Is never won. You earn it and win it in every generation. In every generation. That is what we have not taught young people or older ones for this matter. You do not finally win a state of freedom that is protected forever. It just doesn't work that way. Freedom is never really won. What she's saying here is that the struggle must continue, always and always, again and again and again. Don't get it twisted and don't get too comfortable. Don't sit down and say, oh, well, we have a black president, so everything is going to be all right. If you notice, after we got that black president, we got a backlash that was crazy. And we got a backlash because some folks just couldn't stand the notion that there was an African-American man in the White House. They thought White House should be meant literally, not figuratively. Just like these Oscars. Y'all stop going to the movies. I mean, how do you, in this movie Creed, the brother who was the star doesn't get nominated, but Sylvester Stallone, who with all due respect, is kind of on the broke down side, he gets a nomination. How come you could not find one black actor, actress to nominate, or picture, or anything else? Again, the whole notion of the persistence and the changing and shifting languages around race suggests that people subtly and non-subtly send out a signal. You are not a person. You don't count. You're not in the mix. You're not in the room. You don't matter. And then you get these people, those Trumps of the world. Did I say Trumps or chumps? But in any case, all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. But most lives are not defined as 3/5 of lives as part of our Constitution. And that's why people have to say Black Lives Matter. And notably, as we talk about Mrs. King and our lovely Mrs. Williams, let's note that the Black Lives Matter movement was founded by 3 sisters, 3 young women who decided there was enough. And this has been a movement that has young men and women, African American, Latina, Asian, Caucasian, young people coming together because they say, we don't like this model. We don't like this paradigm. We're not putting up with it. But what has to happen? We have to be there too. We have to remember that freedom is never really won. Jesse Helms is dead. Pause. I was raised right, so sometimes I have to stop before I say something else. But Jesse Helms' descendants are alive and well. And they don't have to put hoods on their heads. They don't have to fly the Confederate flag, although it chagrins me much that they do. What does the South not understand about you lost? I mean, just for record, do you not figure you lost? But in any case, there are others who choose to enforce racism in pernicious ways. And what we must do in the name of Dr. King is to oppose and oppose and oppose. The King holiday was not our holiday, African American people. It's the nation's holiday. It's the diversity holiday. It's an inclusion holiday. What Coretta said was this, she said, there ought to be at least one holiday named after an African American man, and Martin is the best candidate. It wasn't just lifting up Dr. King per se, it was lifting up the notion that the world was not a narrow, white, male, heteronormative occasion, that the world was a diverse occasion. So anytime someone comes out of their mouth and says, we want to stop Muslims from coming into our country, or a Muslim cannot be president, or the words illegal alien, which should not be adopted toward any human being, an illegal alien? That's a space creature. Those are words. Anytime someone uses those words, they are disrespecting Dr. King. More importantly, anytime we allow it, we are disrespecting it too. So when we come together in a room like this, all of us, I don't know how many of y'all there are here, but y'all look good. I just have to say that. Some of y'all come back, look, everybody looks good. Everybody is fellowshipping. This is a day when we do that. Then what do you do tomorrow? What do you do for the king and for the queen, in the name of the king and of the queen, in a world where freedom will never be won, when we put down the gauntlet and say, this is how it is? No, it ain't how it is. Here's what Dr. King said, my favorite King quote. He said, I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, peace and freedom for their spirits. Audacity. I have the nerve. You know how you do something out of order and someone says, you got your nerve. You got your nerve. Dr. King said, I got my nerve to believe that people can eat. I got my nerve to believe that people can be educated. I got the nerve to believe that we can have peace. I have the nerve, the temerity, the audacity. I have the follow-through, the follow-up to believe that these things can happen, and I'm going to work for them. And then what you have to ask yourself is, but what did you do? But what did you do? What nerve do you have? We don't have that much nerve anymore, y'all. We accept too much what's going on. We say we can't. The word can't should not belong in the vocabulary of a social activist. I always tell people in my life, no means not now. That's the only way you can raise money, Emmett, isn't it? When somebody tell you no, you say, no, they didn't mean no, they mean not now. I'll be in that place tomorrow. Or the day after tomorrow. Or the day after tomorrow. But in any case, let me just say a couple more things about Mrs. King, and then I'm sure I'm going to sit down, because you all have been so wonderful. This has been such a lovely program. But I want to talk a little bit about her womanism, just a minute, to say that something that she taught that women, if the soul of the nation is to be saved, it must be saved by women. If American women would increase their voting turnout by 10%, we'll see an end to all the budget cuts and programs benefiting women and children. If women would increase their voting turnout by just 10%. So if we remember Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and when we remember, and if we remember Dr. Martin Luther King, we can't just remember it for a lovely day of music and song and fellowship. We have to remember it for the activism. The fact that these folks risked their lives to be activists. Risk their lives to be activists. And so my question to you is, what risk do you take? What change will you make? What work will you do for the king and the queen, but more than that, for our children? Thank you very much.
Let's give Dr. Malveaux another round of applause. I would like to call up the board members of the African American Community Service Agency, Board Chair Natisha Holloway, Vice Chair Muriel Isaac, Secretary Kathy Love Stokes, Treasurer Carissa Travis, Board Member Kenyatta Yarn, Board Member Charles Wilson, Board Member Walter Wilson, Board Member Tina Daniels. These are your board members. They work on behalf of you. So if you see them here this evening, make sure you stop by, give them feedback. You only can grow and do better when you provide feedback and service. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the African American Community Service Agency, we would like to thank all of you for attending. I also appreciate all the organizations in the room that continue to support and come when we call you. Continue to come when we call you. And when you go back to your organization meetings, make sure you designate someone that reports to the agency to get information and give information. When we communicate, it's very powerful. And I would like to also thank the public leaders in the room that continue to support the agency with your tax dollars. If you do not see any support coming from where you live at, you should start talking to your public officials. So if you don't vote, vote. And see how they vote, and go talk to them about how those votes should go. We want to thank the vendors, the small businesses out there still waiting for you to come out, because they have mouths to feed and dreams to fill. So stop by and see all of them. We would like to thank our MC for the evening, Ms. Sheila Robinson, Dr. Sheila Robinson. Our musical guest, Kimberly Jackson. And all the persons that were a part of the program. I want to personally thank Intel. For Intel representatives, the Intel can stand up. If anybody was a former employee of Intel, you can stand up, or an employee with Intel. I met Intel's corporate giver about 4 years ago when she interviewed me about the vision for the agency. She said, I'll be watching. And so she was watching. She came by the agency one day and I showed her the computer lab. And she said, what do you need? And I said, I need funding, of course. So she went back to her team and she talked about the need for STEM in the Black community and communities of color. Intel granted us a $25,000 grant to revision and recreate and reinvent our computer lab, donated 25 laptops. Home Depot donated the floor through multiple organizations, and board member Walter Wilson has done an enormous job in helping us get support for that computer lab. In 2016, we are going to open the computer lab, so be prepared to go to the grand opening. We're going to have a robotics program. We're going to teach Intel security, to teach our seniors what not to click on, what to click on, and teach our young people to start showing our seniors how to use technology. And then Lakeisha Poole, is she in the room? She is going to help us start a Google group for young people, so they have a technology lab to come to in the community. And so I want to thank those groups for believing into the agency and what we are trying to do here in Silicon Valley. And so that's why I ask you to put something, if you can, out of your heart into that envelope. I'll repeat myself. Or I will be parked outside the agency for longer hours looking for you. But again, we thank you. And again, it's the goodness of my God that I believe in, that all things are possible. Nothing is done by myself. So I always call on his strength to do the job. So before we close, can I make sure I have Walter Wilson and Charles Wilson, and I see our queen here. There you are. Miss Shirley, where are you, Miss Shirley? Everybody wave at Miss Shirley. That's my day in, my day out. I'd like to recognize my grandmother is in the room, so I hope I've been on best behavior. Grandma, wave your hand. And my example, my father is here. Pops, would you raise your hand? And my mom, Tarlene, is here. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Wilson, everybody. We'd also like to thank Sabrina, who drove up from Los Angeles. He drives up every MLK luncheon to help us. Brittany, Sharonay, all of the San Jose State students, Santa Clara, Stanford, the ladies of Sigma Gamma Rho for hosting the voters registration. If you didn't get your voters registration card, see these two ladies, wave your hands. We would like to thank everyone on the committee for all of your work, your time. And lastly, Queen Anne Ken, would you like to talk about the Blue Note?
I know they make fun of me every year because we started this 36 years ago, and with Ron McGowan and then with Steve Jackson. After every event, they would host us with food and everything and music, and we'd go over there. And I'm committed that we continue that tradition. So afterwards, everyone who wants to come to the Blue Note and continue this tradition. Capitol Avenue. Oh, Steve, I'd like for you to recognize Steve because he has been doing this for many, many years. And I just want the public to know that he does this. You can always have an event. I've done fundraising at his place with no charge. He's a community activist. So I just want people to know this man has stayed in business for us, just before the baby boomers. So I wanted you to stand, Steve, and say hello and invite people over. So I really appreciate you offering us this every single year, so thank you.